had just left Canada, where they were at war, and they had a hurricane fighter plane factory there. And I used to watch those hurricanes fly over as they test them, and I would think, in a week that'll be over fighting it out with the Messerschmitts. And it excited me an awful lot, just watching those hurricanes. The Hurricane is a sister ship to the Spitfire, and probably shot down more German planes than the Spitfire did. And then one day, as I was walking to church in Duluth, Minnesota, I noticed the headlines on a paper about that tall. And I thought, gee, has the world come to an end? What makes the headline so big? And then I read, it says, Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. And I thought, what's so crazy about that? Where's Pearl Harbor? Singapore or Russia, or where is it? And then I found out it was us. And I thought, Japan is crazy. They won't last 6 weeks against the United States. And then I learned that they had smashed most of our fleet in Pearl Harbor. They took Midway, or they took Wake Island, and they started in the Philippines, and our people just couldn't stand up against them in the Philippines very well. They took Singapore. The British sent 2 battleships down to assist Singapore, and they sunk those 2 battleships in 15 minutes. And I began to worry. I thought, instead of us taking them over in 6 weeks, they might take us over in 6 weeks. And I thought about those hurricanes in Canada, and I thought, that's the way I want to go. I want to see the Japanese from the air if I'm going to see them at all. So I made up my mind I was going to join the Air Force as soon as I got out, which was about 2 months after Pearl Harbor. When I joined the Air Force, they first sent me to a base in Santa Ana, California. And there they taught us ground school and navigation and meteorology and theory of flight. I never saw an airplane in Santa Ana, but I learned a lot of things. I was in a squadron of 180 men. There were 178 Texans, 1 from Arkansas, and me. And I felt like a foreigner, but they were nice guys, and I had nothing against those Texans. But they had a mind of their own. And Lieutenant Chalet, our CO, was determined to teach them to march. That's one of the things they wanted to do. They said, well, you pilots, you've got to learn to march before you learn to fly. And so we had a parade every Saturday. And our squadron always rated near the bottom. They had judges for the squadron. Near the bottom was always our squadron. And poor Lieutenant Chalet, he tried everything. He threatened them, he'd bribe them, he'd do anything to get them to straighten up and march good. And he just couldn't win. Finally, the last day we were there, the last week we were there, he went to the band and said, would you do me a favor? Would you play Dixie as my group marches by? And they agreed. They'd play Dixie when these Texans marched by. I watched my friends all at once they straightened up, just like that. They were marching along like that, and when Dixie came, they all sharpened right up. And that day, Lieutenant Chalet's group won the pennant. And I learned a lot about people then. You can threaten them, you can bribe them, you can coax them, you can do everything else, but if you make them feel proud of what they're doing, you won the game. And I learned a lot from those great Texan boys. Then they sent me to primary training school in Santa Maria, California, where they had little Stearman biplanes, a wing up here and a wing down here. They would start the engines with a hand crank that had a big inertia starter that you wound up. Then when you cut it loose, it would start the engine. The cockpits were open, so we had to wear goggles. And it was cold up in the air, so even in the summertime we had to wear heavy clothing to keep from freezing when we got up in the air. We had about 3 months of that. During that time, I learned to fly an airplane, and that scared me to death, to think maybe I'll wash out. And I had a brand new wife, and I didn't want her to see me wash out. And I can remember walking along toward one of those airplanes and thinking, would I rather get killed or washed out? And I didn't know which. I really didn't know which I would rather have. The first day of the pilot, my instructor took me up to about 5,000 feet, and he said, now, in front of you, you've got a stick. That's the control stick for this airplane. You make it fly straight and level. So I grabbed that stick with both hands, held it as tight as I could, and surprisingly, the airplane went straight and level. And I thought, maybe I'm better than I thought. And I found out it would have gone straight and level anyway, no matter what I did. So that kind of deflated me a little to find out I wasn't that great. But then I now learned to fly, and they sent me to a basic place where they had a faster airplane and one that had a lot more sophistication about it. But in the meantime, they flew an advanced trainer into my base called an AT-6. And I thought, I'll just go look in this airplane and see what it's like. And I stood up on the wing of this AT-6 and looked in the cockpit. And there was instruments all the way around from one side to the other and overhead. Maybe 100 instruments, whereas the old Stearman only had 5 instruments. Airspeed, altitude, and direction, and oil pressure. That's all it had. And that's the most discouraged I've ever been in my whole life. And I looked in the cockpit of that AT-6 and I thought, I've got to fly this. If I don't wash out, I've got to fly this thing, and I'll never learn all that. But surprisingly, you can learn anything, I guess, because in 6 months I was an instructor in that airplane. And I found out you can do anything if you make up your mind to it. So I learned 2 interesting points here. I learned from the Texans that if you make men or women do what they want to do and give them pride in it, let them feel like it means something to them, they do better. And I learned that you can learn anything if you just settle down and pay attention and keep working with it. So then when I finished basic, they said, do you want to be a fighter pilot or do you want to be a bomber pilot? And I said, I want to be a fighter pilot. I want to fly one of those things right there, P-38s. So they sent me to Arizona, Chandler, Arizona, Williams Field. And there I had the AT-6. I had learned to fly the AT-6. I found out it really wasn't that hard to learn all those instruments if I just settled down and learned to do it. And so I learned to fly the AT-6, and when I graduated, they said, or shortly after I graduated, they said, we're going to send you to combat in a P-39, which is a little airplane that has the little fighter plane that has the cockpit just in head of the engine, the engine behind the cockpit. Cute little airplane. But one of my instructors in advance said to me, Stacy, don't let them send you to combat in a P-39. You get in a dogfight and they tumble and then you're dead. He said, I just walked out of the Sahara Desert to prove it. So when they came, they offered me a chance to go fly the P-39 in combat. And I told them what my instructor had said, and they said, oh, we're not going to send you in that then. We'll wait and put you in the Mustang group. The Mustang group never came. In the meantime, I flew 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, every week, with cadets, teaching them to fly blind. Young fighter pilots. And in teaching them to fly blind, I taught them to fly other things too. I learned that in a dogfight, you've got a really tight circle to stay in. And if you can get on the other guy's tail, you can shoot him down, or if he gets on your tail, he can shoot you down. And then I thought, if I try that in a P-39, I'll tumble and he'll shoot me down like he did my instructor. So I didn't get involved in that one. But my friend Kennedy was on the list with me, and he said, I want to get out of here. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to take the P-39, and he did. And he wrote back and said, hey, I'm not flying P-39s, I'm flying P-38s, the one I wanted to fly. But then he got to England and he wrote another letter back and said, our guys are flying so far, the P-38s will go farther than any fighter, and they're accompanying the bombers clear to Berlin. And the Germans let them get to Berlin, then they'll get behind them, and all the other fighters have had to go home, so all the fighters can concentrate, all the Germans can concentrate on the P-38s, and they're just not coming home. Kennedy said, our guys are just not coming back. And then his letter quit, so I guess he didn't come back. One of my friends who has graduated with me walked into our ready room about 3 months later, and I said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Germany. He said, I had to fly east instead of west. That's all I can tell you. So I knew that he had saw that army of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs between him and England, and he'd come the other way and landed in Russia and saved his own life. But then, after I'd been an instructor for a while, my wife, she took kind of a dim view of flying, really. And one day the Air Force told me I could take my wife for a ride. So I said, Velma, you want to come and ride in this airplane? And she said, I guess, if you want me to. So I put her in the back seat of an AT-6, which you'll see over there. And her up in the air, and she'd never been in an airplane. She sat in the back cockpit, and I sat in the front cockpit. I gave her a radio so she could talk back and forth with me. When we got up in the air, I thought, boy, I'll bet this will really impress her. I said, how are you doing? She said, Bill, you've been telling me this is great, but this is just like being in my armchair. And I was deflated, and I thought, oh, there's got to be something fun about this. So I did a few things like this, and called her again and said, how are you now? And she said, just like I was in my armchair. So I did some more maneuvers and big maneuvers, and I called her again and I said, how are you doing? And she said, same as I'd be doing in my armchair. I thought, I can't let this go. And I remembered that with the students that I was teaching to fly blind, I had a hood over them. And one of the things I taught them was to recover from a bad position if they ever got in a bad position, like upside down, on instruments. Just use their instruments to recover. And I thought, well, as a last resort, I'll treat her like I did my students. I'll turn it upside down and see if she still feels like it's an armchair. So I turned it upside down. One of the things the students have to do is cut the throttle so it won't overspeed. There's a red line on the airspeed indicator that says do not exceed, which means you might tear your wings off if you go any faster. Something like 550 miles an hour or something on that AT-6. So I turned it upside down and it headed straight for the ground when I turned it loose. But I didn't remember to cut the throttle because the students had always done that. And once I looked down and the airspeed indicator was right up against the red line, maybe a little past the red line. And I thought, holy mackerel, I've got to get this thing straightened out quick. So I pulled it out so fast, it blacked her out. And then she got sick. And I thought, oh dear, now I've done it. She didn't say any more about the armchair. Then after a while they sent me to Central Instructor School after I'd been an instructor for a year. They sent me to Central Instructor School. And there I was with mostly returned combat pilots who had been flying in Europe and in Asia. And I got a lot of fun out of just talking to these guys about things that had happened to them. And then they sent me back, and I had orders to go to B-29 training. First as a flight engineer, then as a co-pilot on B-29s, four-engine bomber. And while I was learning to fly the B-29, they also taught me to fly the B-24 and the B-17. And I learned that flying a four-engine bomber was not hard, nor was it boring like I was afraid. I used to say to my fighter pilot friends, I don't want to be a truck driver. I don't want to drive a B-17 or a B-24 or a B-29. But I found out that was not too bad. I was telling Scott today, when they first come out with the B-17, I was about 16 or 17 years old. And I looked at the thing in the movie newsreels, and I thought, oh, you need to be some kind of a wizard or some special kind of a guy to fly that. And then one day when I was flying one, I thought, I'm no wizard, I'm no special kind of a guy. What a joke to think that I even had to be that kind of a guy to fly one of these. And I learned to appreciate the B-17 especially, but the B-29 and the B-24 were nice to fly too, especially the B-29 was pressurized and air conditioned, so my wife would have really felt like she was in the armchair if she'd have been in a B-29. But then after a little while there, they said, you're going to go to bomb the Japanese next week. You're going to go to the Pacific. So they had me, my wife was with me at Salina, Kansas. And they had me send her home because I was headed for Japan. And then they called it off just before we left, just before we got on a B-29 to head for the Pacific. And I've always been kind of glad that I didn't drop bombs on the Japanese, because General Curtis LeMay took over from General Haywood Hansel to run that operation back there. And Haywood Hansel was concentrating only on factories and shipyards and things like that. But General LeMay, for some reason, wanted to bomb civilians. And he completely burned out Tokyo. And they showed us the kind of a bomb they were using in Tokyo. It was a little bomb. And when it would go off, it would make a fire that was so hot that nothing would stand up under it. And to show us how tough it was, the man who was demonstrating dropped the bomb in the vat of water. And it went through the water and burned a hole in the bottom of the vat. And that's what they were dropping on the Japanese homes. And so I was very, very glad I didn't get to do that, but I came within a week of it. Anyway, I went from there to a place in Albuquerque, and I flew there with a test flight group. And there I got to fly a lot of different planes, all the transports, all the bombers, and several other planes. And I really enjoyed that little feature. The Air Force had 3 big transports, the C-54, the 347, and the C-46. I got to fly them all, and I really appreciated that. One of you mentioned Oklahoma City to me tonight, which has a special place in my heart. I had to ferry a B-29 from Albuquerque to Tucson 2 days before Christmas. My wife was home in Randolph, Utah, and I desperately wanted to get home. I hadn't seen her for several months. But I still had to take this B-29 to the Davis Mountain Air Base in Tucson. I can still remember I looked over the edge and called the tower and said, give me landing instructions, and they said, you can't land, I've got 2 jets taking off, and I'd never seen a jet before that. I was at 10,000 feet, and ordinarily a P-51 or a P-38 or a P-47 taking off could have come up to us in 5 minutes from the ground to 10,000 feet. These 2 jets took off and came right up to me in one pass. And I thought, we're in a new age. I just couldn't believe those jets had made one sweep and come right up where I was. Anyway, we landed in Tucson, and then I thought, I've got 2 days to get home for Christmas, and I don't even know how I'm going to get home from Tucson to Albuquerque if I take a train. That's one of the days right there. If I can't find somebody going that way, I'm stuck. So I went into the ready room, and there was a guy sitting there. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to find a co-pilot to go to Oklahoma City. And I can't get there without a co-pilot, and I can't find a co-pilot. And I had 2 guys, Kobush and Oaken, with me. And I said, if you'll take my 2 friends to Albuquerque, I'll go with you to Oklahoma City. And then I'll try to find my way back from Oklahoma City rather than Tucson. It'll be just as easy. So we got in his big C-46 transport, and I rode co-pilot with him to Albuquerque. When I got to Albuquerque, here come a guy running out from the ready room. He said, hey, would you guys take me to Oklahoma City? And I said, you just got yourself a soft seat. I'll give you my seat and you can go to Oklahoma City and I'll go to Randolph, Utah. So I quickly ran down and barely caught the bus to Evanston, Wyoming, and got there about 7 o'clock in the evening. But in the meantime, I called my family and they met me there. My wife didn't even know I was coming. So Janet and my wife were at her Aunt Norma's house. And I walked into Aunt Norma's house, and she didn't say hello, Bill, or anything else. She yelled, Velma, look! And Velma happened to be staying with her then until dark, till night late. So Oklahoma City means a lot to me. It got me out of Tucson. In the meantime, I learned a lot about people as well as airplanes. I learned that people do funny things to prove their point. The Russians and the Americans were rushing through Germany, trying to get as much territory as they could so that the other country couldn't get it. And it looked like the Russians were going to get Dresden in Germany before the Americans and British could get there. And I still think to this day that the American generals decided we're going to show the Russians what happens to people who cross the Americans and the British. So they sent a British Mosquito bomber loaded with gasoline in the Bombay tanks so he could fly all night. And the British RAF major in the Mosquito bomber directed the bombing traffic on Dresden, and they started at one side and bombed all the way across every inch of Dresden until they got to the other side. Pedestrians were streaming out by the thousands, those that didn't get killed with the bombs. And when they got through, there was absolutely nothing left of Dresden. I saw a picture of Dresden and it looked just like Hiroshima, just flattened completely. And I'm sure right to this day that the American generals and the British generals were showing Russia, this is what happens to anybody who crosses us. And maybe it kept us out of another war, I don't know. They may have known what they were doing. But that really worried me, and to see all those civilians get bombed that way. So when the war ended, I was very glad I didn't drop any bombs on anybody. And I look at the young Germans, like President Duttorf and others, who could have been flying against me. And I thought, I'm glad I didn't have to shoot you in a German Messerschmitt or a Buckwaldt or